Creativity is more than just having talent. It's about making a choice to utilize whatever talent you do have. That's a lot easier to say than do sometimes because self-doubt and insecurity can serve as considerable obstacles. It didn't start that way because as kids, we created without such distractions. Sometimes I think we spend a lifetime trying to unlearn all that stinking thinking. For Brooke Schultz, her love of photography is more than just about making memorable portraits of families, but helping other photographers to leverage their desire to be a creative person. Using her workshops and her podcast, Heartful with Brooke Schultz, she does just that. This was a conversation that I very much look forward to, as it provided a special moment of positivity during some very dark times. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to the Candid Frame. Well, Brooke, welcome to the Candid Frame. It's really nice to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Ibarian X.
As you know, my show is often about more leading a creative life or leading a photographic life, which is all about just being creative. And your podcast and a lot of what I've picked up from you focuses on that as well. So I thought this might be a fun time, not just to learn about you and your work, but just to have just a conversation about creativity.
I love it.
Let's do that. As much as I want to learn about you and your work, I think having a conversation like this is always good to have with someone.
Yes, thank you.
And one of the things that was kind of interesting was this idea of giving yourself permission to be creative. And having been a man, I've always taken it from the male perspective because it's the only choice that I have.
Yeah.
But it was interesting in terms of something that I heard in terms of one of your episodes, speaking from a woman's perspective, especially a woman who is a wife and a mother. And in terms of sometimes the guilt that some women feel who are under those circumstances about making the choice to be creative for themselves, and in terms of seeing it as something that's selfish. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's not something that I really have had an opportunity to really discuss, but since you really have touched on it, I think at least a couple of times in your podcast, I thought that would be a really interesting way of starting the conversation. So talk to me about that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm curious to know, have you ever experienced that, like a guilt feeling for being creative? Or is it just like, I'm creative and I need to kind of work through the creative process, but not so much the guilt in terms of other aspects of your life?
Yeah, most of my guilt has been not doing it.
Yeah.
Not so much that I felt like I was depriving the people in my life something as a result of making the choice to be creative.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that because I think it speaks to what women currently experience in a cultural sense, that to be a good wife, mother, or just woman in general, you are expected to do it all perfectly and don't let anyone see you sweat type of thing. And especially to be a quote unquote good mother, you're expected, and it's kind of like this thing that runs in the background, I think, of just give yourself entirely to your children, and any time that you spend away is somehow demerit or is taking away something very valuable from them. And so that's been something that I've had to really consciously reprogram in my own belief system, to believe that the creative impulse is a human impulse. And regardless of our roles, whether it's a mother, a grandmother, a professional creative person, or just someone who enjoys taking pictures or whatever your creative outlet might be, that those impulses are human, and that any humans in your care, whether it's children or otherwise, are going to be benefited by that creative impulse and by watching you be creative.
Did you ever feel this before you were a parent, or is this something that seems to have become especially pronounced after giving birth to kids?
I think it's definitely more after having kids. kids are so needy. They need you all the time. And especially as in my family and many women, as a mother, you're the primary caregiver. And so you're the one that it falls upon to fill those kids' needs all the time. And my kids are really little. They're 7, 5, 4, and 3 months. So they need me a lot. And so walking that line and that tension and dance between how much they need me and what I need myself is a really interesting one to walk. And I think all of us walk that in one way or another in creativity, because we have other obligations besides just, sitting around getting inspired, making creative work, so it's a tension that everyone can relate to, but I think it's especially prevalent in motherhood.
Yeah, I had to sort of come to terms with that early in my marriage, because when it came to my photography, it's like when I wanted to do it, I would do it. Part of the negotiation in terms of my relationship with my spouse, in terms of our time together and me making photographs, is like I had to be really conscious of the fact that sometimes that time is about us spending time together, not just for me to go out and make photographs. Right?
Yeah.
And that could be and that was a sort of source of tension early on, especially when we would go on vacation or go out, because I always had my camera with me. So I just had to be a little more considerate. And it didn't come easy, but I think that was largely as a result of me trying to make my wife happy, and as well as me still being able to express that part. So I had to sort of find a way of coming out with a balance. Otherwise, I never really had to consider someone else's desires or wants or needs when it came to whether I wanted time to dedicate to whatever form of creativity that I wanted.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I think, especially as mothers, things change so much more quickly. My little one who's 3 months old is a completely different kid than he was at 1 day old, in terms of his needs and personality, even his abilities, what he can do. And so I think we got to give ourselves permission to get it wrong. There's going to be times where I I'm on vacation, I take too many photos. And there's going to be times where, I'm in the thick of motherhood and I really need to pull out the camera for myself, but I don't for whatever reason. So I think that dance and that willingness to get it wrong sometimes, no matter how far along your creative path you might be, is really key.
Did you already have an active photographic business before you got married and had kids?
I started my business in 2012. And so I got married in 2010. So I didn't, and then my daughter was born in 2013. So it was right before, but very, very much all at the same time.
So tell me about how that came to be.
My business or
the choice to become a professional photographer. Yeah.
So when I was getting married, I fell in love with Jonathan Canlis. If you know his work, he was a portrait wedding photographer in 2008. And his work was work that I just felt transported by, that I felt like I knew the subjects, that his images kind of took me somewhere else. And having that experience was so magical, so that I became sort of a photography enthusiast at that point. Then when I was getting married and having my own wedding images, that was another really fun and also kind of rocky experience. I started out with a photographer who I didn't gel with. And then as far as style, and I was trying to make her something she wasn't, which, as we all know, is never a good idea. And then I ended up with a wedding photographer who I absolutely loved the images that I got. And then after having that experience of being on the other side of the camera, then I really felt like, maybe I could do this. And I had a family friend when I was in high school who took me under her wing and helped me learn Photoshop, and I did editing for her. So I was just a buff for a while. And then after I got married, then I just was young and stupid and just thought I can do this. My coworker was getting married and she wanted to have the cheapest wedding possible. And I just foolishly raised my hand and said, I can do that. And it was classic, every rookie mistake you can make, I made. But so I started out as a wedding photographer. And then as I had more kids and my kids started getting older, then I started to fall in love with family photography and family work.
Well, being young and dumb, it does have its advantages.
For sure.
Maybe not the dumb part, but I think the naive part is probably a better description of that, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
You also don't know what you can't do.
Oh, 100%.
Which can be a really sort of a good thing. Knowing too much can be just as stifling as not knowing enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned my podcast. My podcast is basically like a pep talk for all of us to try to make more work, make more creations. And I think my 20-year-old self would have looked at that and thought, what? Who needs that? Who needs a pep talk about how to make stuff? Just go out there and do it. Who cares?
Yeah. In your first episode, you had talked about starting a novel. And one of the things that I liked about that is like, no one ever has to see it. I can just do it just because it's fun. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I know how true that is, but it was a good reminder that anything that I do creatively, I can just do it for the pleasure of it, and no one ever has to see it.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the struggle that I have, and I think a lot of people have, is that if I choose to be creative, it's going to be any good. And that always assumes the fact that someone else is going to see it and make a judgment on it. And it's like, no one ever has to see it. And if you enjoy doing it, you can just do it for the pleasure of it and never have to worry about whether it's quote unquote good.
Yeah.
Did you have a good time making it?
Absolutely.
And I think as adults, we completely lose that. And as you mentioned in that episode, kids don't worry about it. They just make stuff just for the sake of making it.
Yeah. Yeah. And their judgment is so much, they hardly ever have judgments about whether their work is good or not good. Like, I don't think none of my kids sit around looking at their, finger paintings and saying, oh, this one's so good or this one's so not good. They just keep making. And I'm so inspired by that, to just get all the mind drama away from it and just get right to the heart of it, which is that creative impulse is a human impulse. And let's just follow that without all this extra baggage.
So tell me about as you were growing your business, getting more clients, what did you start finding were your strengths? Because there's no shortage of people who photograph weddings, photograph kids, photograph families, and you can't help but start comparing yourself, especially to the people you're starting to emulate. But I think an important part of being able to see yourself through those initial times is not so much whether or not people are paying you. It's more about recognizing the things that you're good at or that you feel good about when you're doing it. What were those things for you?
Yeah, I love that distinction between things that you feel you're good at and things that you feel good doing. Because like we were just saying with the creativity in all its forms, it's about what you feel good doing. And for me, it was two sides of the same coin. I felt so good seeing people through the camera and through the lens and showing them a version of themselves that they really resonated with. I remember getting an email from a bride who just said, oh, I'm just crying. How did you make me look this good? All my life, I've hated photos of me, and you somehow made me look incredible. And that was my first taste of photography being able to transport someone else to a better version of themselves. And then as I got into family photography, I realized how necessary and life-giving that was for me on both sides of the camera, that so much of my mothering life was invisible. And I would make food that we would eat without proof that it was ever there. I would do all this work in my four walls every day that nobody was there to witness. To be able to see me with my family through imagery, whether it was self-portraits or images that other photographers had made of me, made me feel like my best self. And that was the feedback that I got from other mothers, especially, was this helps me do that invisible work with more passion and zest and, vitality than I could without being seen that way. So, but the flip side of that is that struggle of feeling invisible. And I think lots of us humans and creative people, all of us together, we want to avoid the struggle. We want to just focus on the strengths. But every strength is a weakness, right? At the same time, if you're really good at, helping people be seen, you might also feel invisible, and it's two sides of the same coin. But as artists, we really have that calling to lean into those curiosities and those struggles in our own lives to, I think, make our most powerful work.
I like the description of those qualities being different sides of the same coin. Because I think we just tend to just look at negative as being completely encapsulating everything about us. And it's like, no, it's not really true.
Yeah. I used to be so jealous and just wildly envious of women who wanted to stay home. And they were content to be stay-at-home mothers, and they didn't have, all these big dreams and things that I had. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she was super mom in every sense of the word. So I had so much baggage around that until I realized, hey, I'm not the only one with this struggle. And I think that's the beauty of art and any type of photography, is that it can really shine a spotlight on those areas that we feel like are such a problem. Like you said, the negative stuff that we kind of just wish we could eliminate and say, hey, maybe this isn't the worst thing. Maybe this is just part of the gig. And now I've just made so much more peace with that to say, what a gift. Like it's a gift to struggle. It's a gift to have the tension. It makes for interesting work. It makes for an interesting life. We all think that we want a life without problems, but that life would be so boring.
The choice to dedicate yourself to being a good parent as well as having a business, that's a lot of energy. It requires a lot of time, and both are limited. So what are the things that you do to be able to make sure that you're dedicating sufficient time to whatever you need to do in terms of your business, as well as being able to take care of your kids, especially with the age range that they're in? Because it's not like they're all going to school. Right?
Yeah.
They're very demanding in terms of your time.
Yeah. I photographed a family a little while ago, and we had done a maternity session. She had a little toddler, and she was pregnant with her second baby. And so we'd done a maternity session, and I was in town again right after her baby was born. And so I was like, hey, let's do a newborn session. Let's do it. And she was like, I don't know. We just did that other session. Like, she went back and forth. We almost didn't do the session. We ended up doing it. And that baby unexpectedly died 2 weeks later.
Oh, man.
And I mean, of course, as a parent, that's your absolute worst nightmare. And those images, she looks tired in some of them, she and her husband, they look like you look if you don't know that's coming in 2 weeks. There's everything wrapped up in those images. There's joy, there's heartbreak, heartbreak that just comes with being in a family, not just with loss. There's everything in those images. And so to answer your question, what helps me the most is remembering the power of what I'm doing, whether it's in my mothering life or in my business, in my photographic life, that it matters so much. And that even though we can talk about the power of photographs in a way that kind of becomes a little trite or cheesy with stories like I'm telling, it's no less true, that the work we do matters so much. And so when I'm working and I work from home and my kids are, screaming outside the door with the nanny, then I just try to give myself a little bit of a view of the forest through the trees. Like, yeah, this matters so much. The work that I do for clients matters so much. And then when I'm not doing work, the work that I do with my kids matters so much.
In talking about this, I'm trying to be sensitive in terms of, gender roles. in terms of not just simply asking this simply because you're a woman, but for me, the circumstances under which a man is primarily taking care of kids usually happens later on in the kid's development. It's after parents have split up, right? And it's usually the kids already in school, so they may share custody, or the man may have primary custody of the parent. And so the dynamic is very different because it's not really early in the kids, or in the kids' age, right? When they're fairly young, and all the dynamics of what a family is can vary very, very greatly. But, I suspect that you've had a chance to talk to a variety of different people as a result of your work, as well as the podcast. And rather than seeing as, a particular group as monolithic, what have you learned about how different people in their different roles contend with the thing that we're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I've learned probably won't surprise you, which is that we're so much more alike than we are different. And what I was saying before about how we think about struggle as being this solitary thing. And often photography we do as a pretty solitary thing. That's one of the things that's so life-giving to me about photographing families and being able to be that witness for them, is that I see over and over in every family the same things. I see all those things I was just talking about joy, about heartbreak, about the sacrifices each parent makes to raise a family. I see the pain of being a kid, the struggle of being a powerless child. I see the tenderness between, a parent and a child, and that no matter kind of what the makeup is of that family, that there's so much more similarities and so much more just humanness. I mean, I think that is what is so compelling to me and many others about photography, is that you can't hide your human self when you're in front of the camera. All the emotions come out in one way or another, whether it's through your body language or through your voice. I mean, it's a vulnerable experience to be photographed. And I think there's a bit of a contrarian in me that kind of loves that revelation, no matter who I'm photographing.
For me, to make my life work, it has to be heavily structured. I mark in my calendars the moments I have to meditate, to exercise, not just the meetings I may have or the work that I have to do. I mean, if it's not written down, it's very easy for me to forget it. Yeah. And it's easy for me to be distracted, especially with all the variety of things that I have going on in my life. Yeah. Do you rely on structure, and what tools do you use in order to make sure that everything that you need to get done gets done?
Yeah, I'm very attached to the iCal, the calendar, for sure, scheduling things. But I think the biggest thing for me is being able to transition with grace. And because I do want all of it, I want to do everything. I want to be an amazing mother and an amazing photographer and an amazing business owner, podcaster, all those things. And to be able to do that for me, I found that the key is those transition points and being able to say, okay, yes, now I'm Brooke mom, mom Brooke, and now I'm photographer Brooke. And to let those things, because of course they cross over and they intersect with one another. But that's the biggest challenge, is to deal with those intersection points with grace, I think.
It's been a difficult year, making it a challenge for everyone. Speaking personally, the last couple of weeks have been especially exhausting. I'm easing off of my consumption of news media because the unrelenting negativity is making it difficult to maintain an attitude of positivity. I've gotten many messages from listeners that this show has provided many just such an alternative. I'm very grateful that I can be that for many of you, providing you with a positive, hopeful, and encouraging voice. I think we can all do with more of that. If the show provides you that, please consider supporting us financially. You can do that by contributing $5, $10, $20 or more a month by visiting patreon.com/The Candid Frame. That modest amount makes a huge difference for us, and we can do with your kindness and support. Become a Patreon supporter today. Thank you. So tell me about what the schedules you set up for your shoots, because I assume that because you're photographing families or weddings, that it's oftentimes a weekend affair. But nevertheless, you have a lot to do in between those. But tell me about what kind of looks like from week to week and month to month. What have you found that works for you?
Yeah, I think this is a great question because so many photographers just think the vision of success is to shoot as much as possible. And I don't shoot all that much. I shoot on average 2 to 4 family sessions a month, and that's all. So, I mean, I do those mostly on weekends, but because it's just a 2 or 3 hour round trip gig and it's so life-giving to me, then it doesn't feel like this huge time away from my family. And then right now I'm working about 16 hours a week from home, and that has shifted. I used to only work about 10 hours a week, but it just, what I'm saying about transition points and being able to be flexible, like that's what's working right now, but I have to be willing to reevaluate that at any point. My kids' needs might change, my needs might change, whatever it is, to say like, okay, this was working last month, it's not working anymore. And then that's the beauty of being able to be a creative person, being able to be an entrepreneur, is that you can dial it in and change it up as much as you want. And I think a lot of people, entrepreneurs specifically, kind of chain themselves to, they have chains of their own making. Like we have this schedule that we've made that we think we can't mess with, but it's like, well, you're the one who made it, so you can go ahead and blow it up if you want.
Mm-hmm. Learning all the business stuff, I think, is much more of a challenge than it is learning the photographic stuff. It's amazing what you can get away with in terms of not knowing comprehensively about photography and still be able to deliver a good result. But that's hard. You can't really say that as much when it comes to the business side. So what resources did you use in order to get up to snuff with those?
I am a multiplicity of contradictions, as we all are, but there's a part of me that loves the artistry and loves like just feeling the feelings and being inspired and let's get down with creativity. I love it. And then there's the other part of me that eats marketing for breakfast. And I do have a passion for business, definitely not as much of a passion as for the artistry, but I love the business stuff. And so, I mean, I can tell you, whatever resources you're curious about, but the overarching principle for me has been to look outside of photography at what's working in business, at what's working in online business specifically. Like most photographers don't think of themselves as running an online business, but that's a huge bulk of what we do, right? So I study business and marketing and everything from that outside perspective and then apply it to photography.
That's a great insight. What are some of the top things that you learned that you realized were invaluable in respect to that?
One of the biggest things is having an email list. I mean, maybe that's common now, but for so long, everybody in the online world was saying, you need to have an email list, and nobody in the photography world was doing it. And so to be able to, like, it seems so simple, just collect people's email addresses so you can reach out to them directly instead of waiting for them to come to you, whether that's on social media or any other platform. But having an email list, and not to just say, sign up for my newsletter, that you actually offer them something that they want in exchange for their email address. So maybe it's a free guide for what to wear to your family session that they get as soon as they sign up. And then you're able to stay in touch with them about your family sessions, that kind of thing.
Yeah. But one of the things about an email list, and something I'm still learning in terms of all the marketing, is that you have to ask for what you want.
Oh, so huge.
So, but especially for creatives, especially as photographers, it can be very difficult to ask. But it's like, well, you got to do it. Otherwise, you won't get what you want. No one's going to read your mind and say, oh, he wants a job. He wants money.
Yeah.
But getting over the anxiety of asking has been something I've learned to get over. But talk to me about that part of it, because that's a big hurdle to get over.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's huge. And it's something I still struggle with for sure. And I think underlying it is often because we enjoy photography so much, then we think we don't deserve to get paid well for it somehow. Or also that if we just put up photos on Instagram, people will clearly know that we are photographers and they can pay us money to take their photograph. But that's not always the case, right? You can, like you're saying, you can ask people for what you want. And I was just talking to a group of photographers that I was coaching, and I was saying, you can reach out to people and ask them to hire you individually. And they were just like mind blown. Like, what? I can just reach out to somebody and be like, hey, have you had family photos recently? I would love to shoot you and your family. Like, they just were like, I can do that? That's amazing. So I think that, like anything else, it's just a muscle that gets better as you practice, that you're going to feel awful and maybe a little slimy the first time you ask someone to pay you for your services, like specifically, instead of just a general like post on Instagram type of deal. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. And like you said, the more you ask, the more you receive. And I think that the capacity to receive is actually a really underrated skill that we as creative people should and could all really benefit from exercising more.
Yeah, and I think with every opportunity that you have to practice what you love in making photographs, that helps to instill your inherent feelings of value about your work, which makes not only you being able to ask for more money initially, but eventually asking for what you're worth. Because asking for money is one thing. Asking for what you're worth is something else.
Oh, for sure.
But you'll never get there if you never put yourself out there in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's this idea among artists like, oh, I don't care about money. It shouldn't be about money. I'm a purist. I only care about the art. And I think if that's genuinely true for you, that's one thing. But I think a lot of times that's just a mask and kind of a cover up to say, I don't know how to ask for money for this. I don't know how to receive money for what I do. And therefore, I'm just going to say, I don't care about it.
Yeah, and I think that part of that response is they assume that the people that are doing it for money aren't doing it for as altruistic reasons as they are.
Yes.
You know, they're just doing it because they can make money out of it. I'm doing it because I just love it. And it's like, no, that's not, they're not mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
Someone has to pay for all the stuff, right?
Yeah.
All the cameras, all the software, the computer, you know, all that stuff. The money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'd much prefer to, you know, have other people helping me to pay for all this stuff.
Yeah.
Rather than always having to dig through the cushions on the couch.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that people forget what a pleasure it is to pay for a beautiful experience and beautiful art. I mean, if you think about something that you love paying for, like if your electric company called you up and was like, sorry, you can't pay us anymore. You can't have electricity anymore. We'd all be like, no, please let me pay you money. Like, please let me pay you this money. And as artists, what we do is less tangible, but it's no less valuable. I mean, if you think about it, when we're in the darkest of times, like right in the beginning of all the COVID-19 madness and the pandemic, when it was really bad and we were all kind of collectively, I think, really down and depressed. What did we do? We turned to art. We turned to the artists. We watched our favorite movies. We read our favorite books. You know, we listened to more podcasts than usual, or we just listened to the best music. We turned to the artists of the world to say, help me through this. And to say that that's not valuable, or that those artists should be doing that purely from altruism, I think it's just crazy.
You're doing your podcast, and congratulations on getting over 100 episodes. It's no small feat.
Thank you.
I know how hard it can be. But like, as we already talked about, you're a busy woman. You got a lot of stuff already on your plate, much less becoming a podcast producer. But in terms of who you're targeting, I don't necessarily see it as your audience being the people that are hiring you to be a photographer. Or am I mistaken?
That's the thing about podcasting is it's hard to measure, right? Like it's hard to say. So I definitely gotten clients from the podcast and kind of people who knew my work before, but then became more invested in me and what I'm all about and, making the work that we do in family really visible instead of so in the background. Definitely clients have come from the podcast, but you're right. It's not a lot of potential clients, and it's geared a lot more towards people who have a creative inkling that they're not currently following. And that was just, as I worked with other photographers in workshops and retreat and online teaching and all those different settings, what I found over and over was the same problems that kept coming up, which wasn't, I don't know what to do next, or, I don't have enough time or money or anything to do my creativity or to do this photo project that I really want, or whatever it was. It was that it's all of the mind, all of the thoughts, all of the mind drama, all of the reasons why we hold ourselves back that was really getting in the way. It wasn't the excuses that we often think of time or money or experience or any of those things, because people have done, what you want to do with less time, money, or experience than you.
Very true. Yeah.
But and the time's going to pass anyway, right? So it's just about being able to get over yourself enough to make the work and do the creations. But in terms of that aspect of my business, it is a little bit separate, but I do a lot of work with other photographers, and a lot of families that I'm photographing now are other photographers' families. So they, there's crossover points.
But tell me a bit about the choice to do it. Because back when I got started, there wasn't much. So I didn't have anything to compare myself with, which is one of the reasons I think I was able to do it as easily as I did.
Yeah, you're an OG. You have been around a long time. I mean, and huge congratulations on that too. So you mean the choice to do it as far as where do I fit in the market of podcasting?
Yeah, because anytime you jump into a pool where there are already a lot of other swimmers, you can easily convince yourself, well, why should I bother? There's already somebody else doing it, or at least in podcasting, a dozen other people already doing this.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
Use that as an excuse not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for me, it was that I couldn't not do it. I was just talking to all my family and friends constantly and saying, what are you wanting to create that you're not creating, and trying to pep talk them into actually making things. And so I did it for myself. And that was the first impulse. I didn't consider the market hardly at all as I jumped in. And I just thought, even if the only listener is my mom, shout out to my mom, then this podcast is for me, right? Me first. And if it helps somebody else along the way, that's a bonus. And I think your question overall is a really interesting one of kind of why bother? It's really saturated. And that's been a classic question in photography as of, recent years, where photography has become so much more accessible and anybody can pick up a camera and do it. But I think what I would say, and tell me your thoughts on this, is, so what if it's saturated and it's all been done, but it hasn't been done by you? And that specific point of view that you have, you don't realize how unique it is until you're much further down the line. So you have to follow the trail. You have to just pick up one breadcrumb at a time and keep going until you figure out what it is that makes you unique. I don't think you can know that at the beginning.
Yeah. And I think the determining factor is riffing on something you said, is that it's something that I have to do, not just something that I want to do. Even if it starts off as a want, when it turns into a have to do, then it becomes a completely different beast. And from there, you can mine the energy and the will to be able to press on during those times when you just don't want to do the work. If it's just something that you want to do, it's easy to come up with excuses to reason not to do the grunt work that has no glamour or glory in it, but is absolutely necessary in order to get that final result. But like you said, I did the show just for a very selfish reason. I wanted, an excuse to talk to these people, and it's the very kind of show I wanted to listen to.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, that's the reason to do it, not because it's going to derive some sort of, you know, secondary value like money and fame. Because God knows in podcasting, that's, you know, stick to daydreaming.
Yeah.
If that's what you're expecting.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Couldn't agree more.
So tell me about you working with these other photographers. How did that sort of start manifesting itself as part of what you did?
Yeah, so I was really guilty of something a lot of photographers are really guilty of, which is just kind of circling our own drains and being in our own echo chambers in the photography world. And so I kind of just thought, you know, this is who I'm talking to, is other photographers. So I kind of accidentally built a business for other photographers. As my family work started to become more true to me and have more of a unique perspective, then more photographers started to see that and go, I want to do that with my clients. I don't want to just do the cheesy, we're standing in the fall leaves, you know, smiling for the Christmas card type photos. I want to touch all these different aspects of what it is to be in a family. And so I started out doing a 1-day workshop where I just taught everything that I knew about working with families, all my tips and tricks for loosening them up, for, you know, working with kids, all of the above. And then that was an amazing experience, but it was incomplete for everyone who came. And so now I do a retreat that's a few days, and we do 5 family shoots, and we get to just geek out on family photography and getting those candid images, more of that lifestyle. We do a lot of in-home family photography as well. So it's really fun to be able to, as you know, like have that experience with other photographers where you can just kind of geek out and make cool art.
Yeah, I've been working on a personal project where I document the morning routines of young families, and I just go to their homes like soon after they've woken up in the morning.
Yeah,
and spend about 3 hours, and then I'm just like a fly on the wall.
Oh.
That's something that was just propelled by something I wanted to do, just to observe that, and it's been so much fun to photograph in that way. But one of the things that it taught me that is, if I'm ever asked to do family pictures, I shoot it that way because I don't feel comfortable taking people to a park or to a beach and making photographs like that, because it's not in line with the way that I see. But it was an important thing for me to recognize, because it's like, I think that otherwise I would have fallen into the trap of what I think I should be doing rather than the thing I would want to be doing in terms of how I shoot, what I feel, not so much how I feel comfortable shooting, but that's in line with the way that I already work.
Yeah. And in line with how you view family, your story of what it is to be in a family is not, you know, tied to the beach or the park necessarily. So that's really beautiful.
And tell me about you becoming comfortable with your own way of shooting, because, you know, I'm sure that there were ways that it was very different from what you were observing other photographers that are already out there doing this.
Yeah.
And you feeling okay with, well, this is just the way that I like to do things, and being all right with that.
Yeah. And I think I didn't realize how different it was at first. I didn't realize how much of a black sheep I was until I started looking at the work and sort of comparing it a little bit to what was already out there. And that's the thing is that we look around and we want to know what's possible by what is being done. But if history has taught us nothing, I mean, it should be that we can't predict the future by the past or by the present of what's possible. So I really started to lean in and give myself permission to just love all the things that I love and to find beautiful all the things that I find beautiful. I think we all have a different sensibility in terms of beauty and what it is that we find beautiful, and realizing that and kind of following that path of really noticing, oh, what is it that I find beautiful? So I was looking at a lot of fashion imagery, to be honest. And, like I grew up just poring over magazines and reading all of those like typical beauty magazines and loving those photographs. And so I thought, and like you said about the podcast, that you made a podcast you wanted to listen to, I just made photos that I wanted to, like where I wanted to be that mom, of the way that I wanted to be seen as a mother, and not just this, like, moms are portrayed the same way in every commercial. Like they wear the same clothes and they are portrayed like in this very vanilla, very, same way. And I was much more concerned with like a mother's individuality. And in so much family photography that I was seeing, it was focused on the kids. It was like all about the kids, and mom and dad were there for a couple. Whereas I really see family in terms of mom and dad, and because it all starts there, right? And that relationship being the core of it. And of course that we can go as deep as we want with that, like my childhood and, my parents having a very strong relationship with each other and really putting each other first and including us kids in their romance. And I mean, I remember my mom enlisting me and my 4 brothers as waiters for their Valentine's Day dinner. I mean, we served them Valentine's Day dinner. I mean, that was the type of relationship that they had. And so, but my relationship with my husband is different than that. And so, I think that a lot of times as we make art, we're working out all those really deep psychological experiences through our images. And we forget that can be in service of other people. That was kind of a long-winded answer to your question.
One question that came to mind is, like, so much when I do see family photographers, it's mostly cisgender families. You got a mother, you got a father, you got a couple of kids. Mm-hmm. And there's so many different types of families now. Mm-hmm. They're not just parents that are, gay or lesbian, but you also have single parents. Yeah. Right. And I'm wondering, in terms of marketing to them, or I don't know what experience that you've had with families in which there's only a single parent, but in which the family portrait still becomes a consideration and something that they want to buy into. I just realized I don't see much of that when I look at photographers that market themselves as family photographers.
Yeah, and I think so much of that is that we attract more of what we already show, whether it's, any category. And so if you are showing a lot of imagery of single parents, you will attract more single parents because they feel like you get them and you have shown that you serve them. Same with any other, category that's underrepresented in the landscape right now. And so what I would challenge all the photographers listening is, what don't you see? What don't you see in the landscape of photography in your genre that you wish you saw? And then go out and make it on your own dime first, and then you'll be able to get hired for it after you show that that's what you do.
Yeah. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is, I ask them to recommend another photographer, and it can be anyone, and someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that photographer be and why?
Oh, do I only get to pick one?
I try to hold people down to one. Otherwise, people can keep me here for another 20 minutes.
Oh, it's so true. Okay. So like a current photographer or a...
It can be anybody.
Okay.
Anybody.
All right. Well, my all-time favorite is Richard Avedon. So, I mean, I highly doubt that anyone listening hasn't explored his work, but maybe just go give yourself a little refresher if you haven't explored his work in a while, because the way that he uses emotion and the way that he explores the landscape of a face and the dynamics between people and the way that he was a genius across so many genres is just really inspiring, no matter what kind of photography you do.
Oh, thank you for that. And thank you so much for your time on this Saturday. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a treat.
Thanks to Brooke for joining us. Find out more about her and her work by visiting BrookeSchultzPhotography.com and check out her podcast, Heartful, with Brooke Schultz. If you're a devoted listener and subscribe to the show, write us a review on whatever service you listen to podcasts. Those reviews have allowed us to grow. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and our mailing list. On the YouTube channel, I offer critiques on images submitted by TCF listeners like you, while the mailing list keeps you updated with all TCF events, including workshops and more. Sign up today. And remember, you can support the show by contributing to our Patreon effort or make a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal. Thanks to Michael Lichter, Stefan Burrell, and Matt Conti for their recent contributions. We also provide a series of ebooks on photography available for purchase on our website. It's my way of sharing my experience and knowledge and another way for you to support the show. And if you can't find every episode of the show on whatever service you listen to podcasts, download the Candid Frame app, which is available for both Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker. And our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at Incompetech.com. And this is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame.